Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, Sweet 16 March Madness NCAA Tournament Edition. Tremendous basketball over the first 4 days, but the stakes only get ratcheted up from here on out until they crown a national champion in Houston. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, 4 days of end-to-end madness, some games better than others, but good to have the tournament back in full force like always.
Should be a fun one. Some good games here in the Sweet 16. Even, the likes of FAU moving on looks like a very much tight contested game. You get a team like Michigan State moving forward, who most didn't expect, now a favorite in the Sweet 16. And I think just kind of my overall vibe there was pretty bang on accurate with the overarching assessments, right? That the left side of your bracket, specifically the East, was going to be pretty chaotic. Purdue was a horrific 1 seed. We knew the issues they had on the perimeter offensively and defensively keeping in front. You had some wild end games from a financial perspective in Utah State, San Diego State with the foul under 1 second to go, deciding who covers that. You had some wildness with UCLA up 8, and they're following on a step back 3 to cut it to 5. And then Northwestern never fouling with 7 seconds to go. You had the TCU Gonzaga last second cover in the wee hours of Sunday morning. And then, just like Miami looks like $1 million against Indiana, but probably should have never been in that game. And, Drake blows a 6-point lead with 3 minutes to go. So I think it was an exciting 4 days. Unders were, very prevalent. Thursday, Friday started to kind of level off towards the weekend. Rims were extremely tight, and then something that is making its rounds everywhere with the new implementation of a ball that some teams had never played with all season. So led to a little, short 2-3 day sample size of variance with
always interesting to see how some of those tournament trends manifest over the first day or two and how quickly they can correct as players become more comfortable with the venues, playing their second game in as many days, and obviously the market, it is the ultimate determinant of efficiency, and you saw some of those totals get bet under, some games by as many as 6 to 7 points end up going over, highlighted by the game that you outlined with the ridiculous finish between TCU Gonzaga well after midnight for those folks on the East Coast. We have an entertaining show for you today. We decided to bring in a hired gun, someone who's lived the tournament life in the past, and rather than make you guys wait and sit on pins and needles, we'll invite a former Tennessee great Ron Slay into the fold to help us break down all things SEC. Excited to welcome in our guest for the Sweet 16 show. He's a man that for college basketball junkies probably needs no introduction. Logged nearly 110 games playing for the Tennessee Volunteers, 14.5 points per game, a shade under 6 boards. I was blown away that he was such an efficient shooter. I think the numbers are lying to me. You can now listen to him every day, Monday through Friday on 3HL in Nashville, or you can see the rapidly rising media star as part of the SEC Network's college basketball coverage throughout the season and this weekend. Love to welcome Ron Slay. You are now officially a member of the Bet the Board family, my friend. Thanks for joining us today.
Man, I feel good, man. I feel like I should have some kind of shirt or a hat or a tie, a bow tie, a cummerbund, something on. Like, I know we're not getting ready for the wedding yet, but I feel like it should be a cummerbund, and I should be like, that should be my wrestling belt, my entry into Bet the Board podcast.
We can work on things along those lines, but there's no reason to be suited and booted first thing in the morning as we sit here on a Wednesday. You can save that for the studio appearance, but Slay, should we peel back the curtain a little bit on what was supposed to happen last week that didn't happen? You're just lucky that Tennessee Volunteers are kicking into the second weekend. Otherwise, this was going to be an awfully awkward experience when you blew Payne and I off last Wednesday.
No, I know exactly what was going on. See, it was a breakdown of communication, but it wasn't a breakdown of communication on the floor for the Vols. The Vols were going to come through because they're battle tested, unlike some of these teams that we're going to talk about leading into Bet the Board, not battle tested.
Payne, you said it perfectly. What was the comment you made to me when Slay wasn't able to join us last week about Tennessee and what it meant for their future outlook?
Well, I immediately said to myself, now I have to move the Vols into my bracket just because karma is going to allow Ron to redeem himself and show up here this week for the Sweet 16. Todd's more of the corporate guy on this podcast, so you're going to have to give him a proper excuse. For me, I'm thinking, let the man live. He probably had this Rick Fox, he got game-like story that prevented him from joining us last week. And I think that would be a good story now that you mentioned it. Todd, wedding day is quickly approaching, and he needs to vicariously live through the single guys.
Hey, man, listen, Payne, I'm going to tell you the truth, man. Now, I had to call a game. I had to call an NIT game at the last minute, and it ran late. But to add to the mystique of Slay, I will say, man, now the Rick Fox, the stories like that, the Ray Allen stories and stuff like that, it ain't too far away from, my college experience. I just like to say I had a great time. We were back-to-back voted Party School of the Year by Playboy. Just saying.
And you were the former SEC Player of the Year. Todd excluded that from the intro.
Well, I can't pump the guy's tires up that much. His head's going to blow up so big that by the time we finish things up about, 20, 25 minutes from now, Slay's going to walk around here flexing, and I'm going to have to deal with this later in the afternoon when the domain flips and he goes from playing on our home court, Payne, to me playing on his.
See, Payne, what he ain't got to worry about, though, is I don't care about the inflation of the tires because I just do like Barney Rubble and Fred Flintstone and pedal with my feet. I'm cool. I'll pick the car up and run with it, baby. I'm strong, man.
I did leave out the fact that you also were part of the first Tennessee team to get to the Sweet 16 since 1981, and I feel that's the perfect segue. We'll get into the FAU Tennessee breakdown with you as well, but when you look at the composite snapshot for the SEC as a whole, Tennessee obviously gets a little bit disrespected in the betting market. We saw them go from a pick 'em to a 3.5-point underdog and just looked a lot more physical. We're able to bully Duke at the point of contact. We can get into the officiating and how that was viewed by some of the college basketball purists, but the SEC as a whole, 3 teams moving on to the Sweet 16. It's a league that inside and out. What were some of your takeaways for the other 17 or the other teams in the league, not named Tennessee, who we'll get to?
Man, I'll tell you, when you look at it along those lines, what you heard all year kind of remained true going towards the end of the year. Look at Alabama. They play defense. You know what I'm saying? Arkansas, yes, the talent pops off the screen and you hear about all the draft picks, but, man, them dudes lock up and play D when they're playing good. And playing at their peak, especially on that end. And I think you can say the same for Tennessee. You look at it, and you have with Alabama's coach and Arkansas's coach, you have a new age of basketball kind of ushered in this era of style. It's not the traditional power like you would play at Tennessee, where you have a traditional 4 and 5 man, then you got a point guard and a real 3-man. With Arkansas and Alabama, it's more positionless. And that's what they go out and get. You got to have 5 guys that can dribble, pass, and shoot. And that's what you get when you look at Arkansas. You take out Trevor Brazile being hurt early for Arkansas, and you would see that. So everything kind of remains true to what you thought it was at the beginning of the season, and you just happen to get to see that at the end of the season now.
Be honest with us here, Slay. I know you're a corporate guy now. The Disney Corporation's cutting you a check, and Kentucky is a big part of everything that goes on over there. But you still bleed Tennessee orange. There had to be a little part of you that felt good watching Kansas State polish off the Wildcats and send Coach Cal and Big Blue Nation home packing before the second weekend of the tournament.
This is the first opportunity that I've had 2 figurines on my shoulders, one being a devil and one being an angel, both wearing the SEC cape. And I was like, yes, we want all the SEC teams to advance, at least 5 of them to get to the Sweet 16. And man, when Tennessee made it, I said they set the tone. Arkansas was able to do it. I thought Auburn was going to do it, but when Kentucky couldn't get it done, then on the inside, because I was getting text messages from Kentucky fans and former players all day telling me, oh, y'all should be happy. Y'all should be happy y'all made it. And then their team went down. I just smiled so happily on the inside. Like it was a moment. You know how you feel like when you get up out of the bed and you're like, man, this a beautiful day. I ought to go out here for a run. That's what I felt like. Except I didn't go out for a run. I just watched Kentucky burn and crash, and it was beautiful. Honestly, I love it.
You know, Payne, it's reminiscent of how you talk about college football, that it's a good day for Florida State when Miami and UF both lose on the same day. So I understand where all you guys that are big college football and college basketball fans live. It's as good to have your programs win some of the marquee games as it is to have those bitter rivals lose.
There's no doubt about it. One thing I wanted to ask you, Slake, is you mentioned a little bit earlier about Alabama's defense kind of flying under the radar, top 5 in defensive efficiency. Is there something you've noticed maybe over the course of the season, whether it was back in November or even just in the tournament here, that if Alabama doesn't win it all, it was because they had a specific chink in the armor? What would that be, do you think?
I think one would be those guys started to stand around watching on the offensive end and not going to the offensive boards, giving themselves second shots. And I would think Bediako somehow got in foul trouble. I think he's done a terrific job of staying out of foul trouble, because when you got a rim protector like that, you don't have to slide Clowney to the 5. You're able to let him play the air quotations 4 spot and be out there on the perimeter where he can shoot. And you got a guy down there that you can drop it off to him, Bediako, man, who anchors that defense, even though it's not talked about. He did get praise in the SEC tournament for being one of those guys. But, man, he's a big-time guy to have protecting the basket. And he brings even though he looks thin, he brings a physicality to the team where you have a guy 6'9" challenging a shot and a guy 6'11", 7 foot coming over to help. That's a total difference when you have a guy like that. So I think that's the biggest change. Bediako staying out of foul trouble, him being healthy and being able to protect the basket the way he does.
You mentioned health there, and I don't want to put your feet to the fire. Hearing anything on Brandon Miller's groin?
Yeah, I don't think it'll be a problem going forward. I think a little bit of that, if I can be honest, was more so of his performance. You know what I'm saying? Like, he stunk it up, so here's a blanket to cover that up. You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody wants to be known for stinking it up that way. And I mean, you look at it, he come back the next game, unless he had the same shot that Pat Mahomes had, or that he didn't take, air quotations, or Marcus Sasser took. Like, I think he all right, you know what I'm saying? So I think it was more so of a pride taking a hit in anything else.
Makes a world of sense. Before we have Todd transition us to the games, I wanted to bring it back to Arkansas a little bit there, because it's really an interesting team, and you have a better vibe than just like a regular onlooker. You understand what can go on in a locker room, things that impact a game outside of the game. You mentioned Arkansas's talent, and somehow, they lose 8 of 11 down the stretch prior to the tournament, but here they sit in the Sweet 16 again. What is Eric Musselman doing to kind of continually outperform some of the numbers metrically? Because we don't really think overly high of Arkansas, but here they are again, right? Knocking off 1 seed Kansas, and they just seem to make noise in the tournament.
Yeah, they do. And I think a lot of it is he starts to depend on the guys that have been there before. The talent is the talent. When you see guys like Nick Smith Jr., you see Anthony Black, Jordan Walsh, but the 2 guys that have carried them have been Ricky Council and Devo Davis. Like, those are the veteran guys. I think when you saw those losses happening, Nick Smith Jr. was incorporated back into the offense, and back into the lineup. Devo Davis had to take a back seat, and when they were on that winning streak, he was scorching. Like, he was the reason that the guys had to come out and defend. Ricky Council the same. The ball was in his hands. So when you incorporate Nick Smith, he has to get back used to playing with these guys. Anthony Black has to get back used to delegating the ball to people, when and how they should get it, and still being able to be effective in it. So I think Musselman does a great job of being able to have guys healthy, for one, when it gets to this stretch. 2, being able to rely on the guys that have been there before and help guide these freshmen. I won't say rookies, which they are since they'll be gone next year. But he's been able to help those guys guide it, and they trust each other. I will say that, being able to watch them and shoot around and practices, you wouldn't think that they're able to mesh the way they are. But, man, they always, every huddle they come to, they're locking arms or putting their arms around each other. It's all laughter and good good vibes that you wouldn't expect, with this top-notch talent. Like, you got at least 3 guys talking about going top 15. So that's hard to keep everything level. I think Musselman does a great job. And then he gets everybody aimed in on one prize when you get to this tournament play.
Hey, I mean, look, Slay, I know I was the galvanizing man that they came after years ago against Texas Tech. So they've tried to make me public enemy number 1 around Fayetteville. So I'm going to have to walk around T-Mobile on Thursday night for that Arkansas UConn game with my head on a swivel, or I'm going to need some of your muscle out here to try and protect me if the Arkansas fans start to get a little bit ornery there if things go sideways. But we will get to that game. We may as well kick it off with your beloved Tennessee Volunteers, who find themselves a 5.5-point favorite, a total of 130.5, taking on FAU in the Sweet 16, a game that'll take place at 9 o'clock Eastern from the mecca of college basketball at Madison Square Garden, as the Vols will look to get to the Elite Eight for the first time since 2010. When you look at FAU, I don't think the casual college basketball fan knows much about the Owls, but this was a team that was fringe top 30 from an offensive and defensive efficiency. We've seen how some of their Conference USA compatriots have played in the NIT. North Texas knocking off Oklahoma State, UAB with a chance to punch their ticket as well, outlasted a good athletic Memphis team, had a very fortuitous bounce to take on FDU, albeit a Knights team that hung around a little bit later, and a 1-2 punch of John L. Davis and Elijah Martin that can be a little bit of a challenge. When you look at this matchup here on paper, and Payne, we'll get to you from some of the underlying numbers in a second, what are the things that you think concern you about Tennessee, and where do you think the Vols have a major edge they can exploit against the Owls?
Well, I think immediately you automatically think the size when you look at it. You look at FAU, and 33 games is a lot of games to win, regardless who you're playing, where you're playing. But at the same time, we talked about earlier, testing, like who has really tested them. I think a lot of listen, I'm an eye test guy. You know what I mean? Y'all can have numbers and everything. I'm going to go by the eye test, the rhythm, and the feel of the game and who's playing hot at that moment. So what FAU did early in the season, to me, really doesn't matter at this point, but the tournament does. So you get some lucky bounces, and you got to have that to be able to advance. I thought Memphis kind of self-destructed in that game in order for them to advance against them. I thought that they had FAU where they wanted to. If Davis doesn't get hurt and have to come out the game, and him and his big man start arguing, him and Penny have to go take a timeout and sit there to get everybody to cool down, I think it kind of threw their mojo off. And then you get the jump ball that was called when it was could have been a timeout. All of that plays into it, but you got to give them credit. So they move ahead. What scares me about FAU, they shoot threes, a lot of them. Like they shot 31 threes against Fairleigh Dickinson, and then they shot 28 threes against Memphis. They didn't hit them, but just to have the gumption to take those threes, whether it be in transition, whether it be a set being ran. And you look at Tennessee, like we're talking about, playing that traditional style with a big 5 at 7 foot and a 4-man at 6'9", 6'10", you got to get out there and guard guys in cross matches. So guys like what's his name, Janelle Smith?
Janelle Davis, you mean,
Janelle,
for FAU?
Yeah, so guys like him, if he gets the rebound and he's close to the 4-man needs to match up with him. So automatically you create a mismatch because of the size. Outside of the big guy Golden, who can match up with the 5, FAU's coming down and they're passing the ball, and that shot is going up. So you got to be able to get a hand up, and at the same time, instinctively, when you're a defensive team, you get a hand up on the shooter and you play not to foul. So sometimes you run past the shot. This allows FAU to get second chance points because they get a lot of long rebounds by shooting these threes. So that's one thing that you got to be conscious of, to challenge the shot on your feet, not jump, turn, box out, and go and get the rebound and then release. Because if you release early, FAU, man, gets 2 opportunities. I ain't gonna miss both of them. So you gotta be wary of that.
You know, Payne, when you look at Tennessee, obviously in the second round, they look like the better team, the aggressor, the veteran-laden group against Duke. But they also shot the ball a heck of a lot better than we've seen them do in the past, and only ended up scoring 65 points, 9 of 21 from beyond the arc. You get an uncharacteristic performance from a senior forward who has a career day at 27 points. When you look at this matchup from a metric standpoint, what stands out to you in terms of where one of these two teams may be able to find an edge they can exploit?
What I think is so great about doing shows like this and having a former player on is Slay disputed metrics mattering, but everything he said was actually perfect, right? The metrics match up with exactly what he said. And I think FAU is obviously deserving of not just being in the dance, but probably should have been seeded better. But they hadn't faced any of our top 50 power rated teams until Memphis in that opening round game. And you know, Keontae Kennedy was out. Kendrick Davis was hobbling around in the second half. And still during the middle portion of that game, Memphis outscores FAU by 16. The end game variance scale was like tipped heavily in favor of Memphis, but FAU won. And then you look at that second round matchup against Fairleigh Dickinson. The sharpest bettors laid it with FAU. Laid 11, laid 12.5, closed 16. FAU's trailing by 5 the first 28 minutes of that game to an FDU team that we power rate 288th in the country. And so, you know, you start to kind of think about it from that perspective, and you look at all the remaining Sweet 16 teams, and yes, the sample size is only 2 data points, but FAU 15th in net shot quality. Only Princeton is worse, which you would kind of expect, right, based upon their power rating, who they played the first 2 rounds. Slay hit it perfectly that FAU is just so 3-ball dependent. 44% of their total shots come from deep, 22nd in 3-point attempts per 100 possessions. But you look at the Vols, number 1 in 3-point defense. They do show some vulnerability when they get spread out, which I think, you know, Slay hit perfectly because they play that traditional 4 and 5 man. They really haven't been tested with that because not many teams in the SEC can actually shoot the way FAU does. We talked about that in the opening round podcast. SEC, worst 3-point shooting conference in the entire country. Tennessee does a good job extending their defense, force teams to kind of beat them off the dribble, take the inefficient mid-range jumper, take it to the hoop, where Tennessee's top 15 in near proximity defense. The concern, though, that I think we all have, and Slay hit this perfectly, we just saw Tennessee bully Duke, regardless of that game being played like a 1980s NBA style game.
That's my style. First team to 75, my style, baby.
They imposed their will. FAU's the 5th smallest team to make the tournament. So this is kind of my issue here is like we made the game 5. It's right around that number. FAU does a fantastic job rebounding its own glass, defending shots close to the rim, but they haven't played anyone, right? And you look at 2 of FAU's losses. It was Ole Miss, UAB. Both those teams really beat them up on the glass and inside. So again, like metrically, slight value on FAU. The way Tennessee plays offense, it's not a team you want to be laying with. The way Tennessee's performed away from home has been extremely inconsistent. So I've steered clear of this game, but I think Slay said everything, you know, perfectly from what his eyes depict, and they match exactly with the metrics.
Two things for me, Slay. When you look at the way things have played out for the Vols, we know about Ziegler's absence, obviously changing the dynamic of how they were able to go about their offensive sets. And of course, the narrative that people like me circulate. I do it to bust your chops as much as anything else, since I look at each team based on its full body of work. But Rick Barnes trying to get that monkey off his back to try and get one of his teams to a Final Four and potentially cut down the nets and win a national championship. When you look at Tennessee and their prospects, not only in this game, but to go further, you know, is there something that you're optimistic about? Is there something that's pessimistic, or potentially an Achilles heel that could get in the way of Tennessee winning that elusive first national title?
Well, I think, man, if you were to get guys in foul trouble, you start to put guys in different spots, and particularly Jemai Meshack or Santi Vescovi, because they're doing the bulk of the ball handling. The problem with Tennessee is the way they're constructed, they have guys that play very good in roles in that particular role. So when you get a guy that moves out of that point guard spot with Zakai going down, you have to take time to, you know, get guys acclimated to playing a different spot along with their spot. And that's added pressure to what you really come there to do. Like Toby Awaka coming off the bench, he's supposed to come in and just rebound. Yeah, that's the energy guy rebound. Now you're starting to ask him to play minutes because you got to slide your side to the point. That means you got to put somebody else at the 3 spot. Tobe got to come in early. You know what? It throws everything off. So that's why health is so big for Tennessee. That would be the only thing if Santi got in foul trouble or Jemai Meshack, because he's emerged as the guy to be able to handle that spot. One thing about the shooting playing the guys in the SEC. This is why I'm not fearful in this game of them playing FAU, because when you pay attention to detail the way they do, they have had a crash course in it when playing Missouri and when they're playing Alabama. So two teams that really shoot the three and depend on the three, although they want to get to the basket as well. But when you're looking at the numbers, they do a better job as far as defending that when that's the game. I think and the coaching staff has done a great job of scouting reporting them, the players being able to transfer that to the court and staying locked in on it. The problem, I think, lies when somebody gets hot. You know what I'm saying? And you get in the hole. Tennessee's not to fight out the whole team. That's the only thing. Like if FAU comes out, gets hot, gets 7 threes in the first half, you're like, oh shoot, what we supposed to do? Because it's not, like you just said, it's not that firepower to. You're not going to have Olivier go for 27 and start hitting threes. You know what I'm saying? This is a drag you down, rock fight, lock the door, let's get it on. You know what I'm saying? There ain't nothing pretty about this. So that would be the only thing, man. If gas got hot and you couldn't get that extinguished early.
Payne, it's exactly like you said. I mean, coming into the tournament, not just as the way it relates to this game, but everything in general. Such a high variance sport. Over 40 minutes, one team gets white hot. Even for 20 minutes, they can put a little bit of separation between them and their opponent. And if a team isn't built the right way, to Slay's point, to come back to erase that deficit, it can be over early in some of these cases.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Slay might not see it this way, but the Vols are playing with house money, right? Mm-hmm. I think the way Tennessee was kind of downtrending late in the season, you lose Ziegler. I think most left Tennessee for dead. You look at some of the inefficiencies the Vols have, right? Not a great half-court offense. They refuse to get easy buckets in transition. Certainly some question marks that we've all discussed about Rick Barnes in March. I guess as we kind of put a bow tie in this game, remove the Tennessee orange glasses for a minute. Can the Vols really make a championship run just being elite defensively and playing physical? And obviously, you know, you have one of the, I guess if you could hand pick a matchup here in the Sweet 16, you got to feel pretty good about seeing FAU as opposed to maybe Purdue or Memphis.
Yeah, without question. And I think as far as making a run, I'm going to leave it this simple. If they can make layups, if they can make free throws and get the free throw attempts, like, and stay 9 turnovers and below, I take this team, the way they play defense, and you give me those 3 keys, without question, I think they can make a run.
I mean, the region sets up perfectly for them. I don't think a lot of people thought that Tennessee would have to go through FAU to get to the Elite Eight and then take on the winner of Michigan State, Kansas State to punch their ticket to Houston and compete in the Final Four. From New York City, though, out to Vegas, where we're going to see Arkansas and UConn do battle on Thursday night. That game scheduled to tip off 7:15 Eastern. It's UConn, a 3.5-point favorite. Total in the game, 145 against the Razorbacks at T-Mobile. As you guys talked about earlier, 3rd straight Elite Eight appearance for the Arkansas Razorbacks on the line here. Pair of dominant ATS sides from their non-conference portion of the schedule. UConn 12-0-1 ATS outside the Big East. Arkansas a shade behind them at 10-4 ATS. When you look at these teams, we know they want to do things a little bit differently. Arkansas wants to get out and run. They want to utilize their athletes in space. UConn wants to slow it down, turn it into a little bit more of a rock fight, but they are not shy on scorers, guys who can light it up from the outside. And we've seen how good Sonogo has been scoring inside, at least through UConn's first 2 games. Payne, I'll let you kick it off on this one, and then we'll get Slay's take. When you try and assess some of the metrics here and you try and identify a strength or a weakness or a path to success, you know, is there anything that you've been able to identify that you think will be able to manifest on court Thursday night?
Well, the first thing is, you know, Slay mentioned the talent that Arkansas has, potentially 3 lottery picks, and, you know, kind of going through Kansas, who was a really bad 1 seed and didn't have Bill Self, and a couple of their key cogs were playing at far less than 100%. The market told you that 8-1 matchup was going to be much closer than I think the seedings would lead the casual fan to think. Just reading the market here, again, the line says Arkansas is going to give UConn everything it can handle and possibly more. Pure power rating, line's a touch short. I was looking for some things that would matter most, and it sucks to say this, but I think one of them is officiating. Like, you hate talking officiating because I think refs have, you know, they're too much involved in some of these games. What we saw in the Sweet 16 a year ago, Gonzaga, Arkansas, basically had a lottery pick, you know, in foul trouble the entire night, and that's why Arkansas moved on. But I'm interested to see the officiating assignment here, because defensively, Arkansas does an excellent job being kind of pesky on the perimeter without following. They allow the least amount of three-point attempts per 100 possessions. Defensively, UConn outside the top 300 in free throw rate allowed, and Arkansas does a fantastic job getting to the line, top 20 rate in the country. So, like, how tightly will this game be called? And I think that will have a direct impact on who advances to the Elite Eight. Matchup wise, UConn's going to have its hands full trying to score. Sonogo obviously coming off just back-to-back MVP type games against Iona and St. Mary's, 52 points on 33 shots in this tournament so far. UConn runs nearly 10% of its offensive possessions through the post. Arkansas, top 15 team defensively in points per possession allowed on post-up. So that's interesting to me there. Pick and roll and ISO, also where Arkansas can be had at times because of how aggressively they play. But UConn doesn't really run an ISO offense. They're not a great dribble, drive, pick and roll team. So, if UConn wants to find success offensively, I think it has to be with movement, cutting. Arkansas outside the top 300 in points per cut possession because they are so aggressive on the perimeter. So I think that's interesting here. But again, ref assignment will play a huge role. Market just moving against our power rating on the game. Early money on Arkansas. UConn didn't look great against St. Mary's. You think about that injury to Alan Dukas really assisted the Huskies. Yep. If you look at the shot quality data, which I don't love to completely lean on, UConn was somehow a 10-point loser to St. Mary's despite winning by 15 on the scoreboard. So some interesting things there underlying.
Yeah, you mentioned that shot quality and obviously how much that game changed with the one injury. UConn able to find a little bit of separation in that second half and keep the game under the total with a 70-55 victory. Slay, when you look at Arkansas, I mean, it's a team that you've watched. You've seen them at their best. You've seen them at their worst. What should they be focusing on in a matchup like this against the UConn team that early in the year, a lot of people thought, hey, look, this is a legitimate national championship contender. Then they fell out of favor when they struggled early on in the Big East and starting to regain some of that swagger and form that Payne alluded to.
Yeah, Arkansas, man, the length. That's what I lean on, and I'm talking about the perimeter length. Like these guys, man, you got 6'7" in Anthony Black, 6'7" in Ricky Council, and then 6'6" in Nick Smith Jr., who's playing like trash right now as a lottery pick. let's just call it what it is. Like he's playing terrible right now. So and then you got Devo Davis who can lock up. So I can't wait to see the matchup between Jordan Hawkins and Devo Davis when he takes that on and tries to lock him up. And then the thing is with Arkansas, man, the reason they're so good in post defense, Trevor Brazile went out early. So they had to go to Mekhi Mitchell and Malachi Mitchell, I believe is his name, the two brothers. And then also you got the big fella. God, I just drew a blank on his name, but I forgot his name. The 5-man also, he starts. Kamani Johnson. So you got those three guys, and that's 15 fouls. You know what I'm saying? And they're going to use them, and they're going to fight. They're going to battle. They're not going to let Sonogo get position like he wants to get position. And the time wasted to get Sonogo the ball is going to be a problem because later you get in the shot clock, then you have to play one-on-one like Payne just said. They're not a great one-on-one playing team. So that length compared to that and challenging contested shots, guess what that's going to lead to? Rebounds and Arkansas off to the races. Now, that right there, if they get held up and don't get to get out and run, you get into a half-court set. I think that's where the problem lies with Arkansas because you actually have so much talent and guys pass up shots because Nick Smith and Ricky Council are supposed to be taking the shots. And when they're on the floor, Jordan Walsh may have an open shot and not shoot it, pass it back out. Anthony Black the same way. Devo Davis the same way because you're going through those two guys. So it's going to be interesting to see what Musselman does with his lineup, how he plays them. Does he bring Nick Smith off the bench? Does he bring Council off the bench? Does he play them all together? I think that's going to be the key. And Jordan Walsh, I think you saw emerge into that role of being that spark plug or that wild card for them, late in the game, hitting that three that he should have took in the corner. He ended up taking it on the wing, making it finally. And all his team was like, shoot the ball. That's what we need you to shoot the ball. So hopefully he understands what his role is. And I honestly like Arkansas. And I don't think that the lottery picks in Anthony Black and Nick Smith Jr. can continue to play like this. At some moment, we saw it in the SEC tournament. Nick Smith took over and started to play well. But Anthony Black, he impacts the game in different ways. So he'll be fine because he handles the ball, plays defense, assists, gets steals and things of that nature. But Nick Smith Jr., he has to score the ball. It's no ifs, ands, and buts. And if Arkansas can hit 5 or 6 threes in this game will be won by 8 or more.
Yeah, I have to give Coach Muss credit for the way he handled Nick Smith in the game against Kansas. Only logged 16 minutes. Wasn't going to give him the green light to pull the Al Harrington anywhere over the half court to shoot his way out of a slump in a game of that magnitude. And I imagine he'll give him a quick hook again here. If Smith can't get going early on the offensive side, the last thing you want him to do is shoot you out of the game when you have so many other capable guards that are out there in Council and Davis to be able to take things over. So should be a tremendous game. Lucky as a college basketball fan, I'll get to see that one up close and personal.
Yes.
Payne, wasn't sure anything else that you might wanted to add on this game before we pivot to your favorite conference and talk a little Mountain West SEC.
Steer the ship properly, sir.
We will do what we can. And on Friday evening, we will see the lone entrant remaining in the field from the Mountain West Conference, the San Diego State Aztecs, go up against the tournament's #1 overall seed in lovely Louisville, Kentucky. That game tips off at 6:30 Eastern time, and it's Alabama, a 7.5-point favorite in the game. Total on that contest, 137.5. No reason to get into Nick Saban's comments about wrong place, wrong time for this particular program. We'll keep it to basketball here. There has never been a Mountain West team in the Elite Eight. 0-6 all-time in the Sweet 16. And since 2011, though, the Aztecs have more tournament wins, 8, than the rest of the conference combined. The #1 overall seed has made the Final Four 8 out of the last 18 years. You look at San Diego State's path, and this is a team who had the good fortune of taking on 2 mid-majors, outlasted College of Charleston, covering in improbable fashion round 1, and then just completely overwhelming SoCon Representative Furman. Meanwhile, Alabama, dominant against Texas A&M Corpus Christi, weren't able to get outside the number late and completely stymied Maryland in their round of 32 matchup. And Slay, you mentioned it earlier. I think so much is made about Brandon Miller and how Alabama can fill it up from the outside. But from a defensive standpoint, this team is truly elite. And I think that side of what Alabama does gets undersold. And realistically, that's the capabilities that can make them a national champion if things break right for them over the course of the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think you look at them, man, this is a team that go 9 deep, and they are positionless. And I think that's the intriguing part about it. When you got a star like Brandon Miller, who gets all of the attention, first of all, let me say, I don't understand how a guy of this caliber gets wide open shots. I've never figured that out all year. I would be playing him 4-on-4. As soon as the balls come off the rim, I'm denying them. But that's neither here nor there. This is the thing. Sometimes he's not running that wing spot. This is what makes this offense so good in transition. Most of the time, they just feel spots wherever you are on the floor, depending on where the ball came off as the rebound, who you're boxing out. You're running towards the offensive end, and you're filling a spot. So sometimes he may be the trailer. Sometimes he may be the first one down. He may be the guy going to drag into a screen or set a weak side screen, which completely takes the action away from the ball. And you kind of forget the guy handling the ball has been in these spots before in Javon Quinterly. That's the way he's been able to shine like that. And then you also see guys coming off the bench, Pringle. You get guys back healthy. Man, they are dangerous. I mean, dangerous. And we haven't even seen Sears play up to his capability yet. So it's going to be interesting once they all get clicking, because they haven't played well. And they've just been who they are to be able to advance. And that's interesting, because if we see anything like we saw in the SEC tournament, played in the NCAA tournament, they'll run rampant. They'll run rampant all the way to the finals, and there won't be a question. And I say that, man, because looking at San Diego State, who have they played? I mean, yeah, you clap.
Slay, you're gonna get Payne. You're gonna get Payne fired up. There's nothing he likes to do more this time of year than take shots at the Mountain West. So you're gonna give him all the fuel he needs. So Payne, you just follow Slay's lead when he casts aspersions over at Aztec country.
I mean, he's spot on, and I think that's the wild part of this game, is because you're hearing everyone try to make a case for San Diego State here, but the market's telling you something completely different, right? Opened as low as 6, we peaked at 8, settled around 7.5 now, and Slay had it perfectly. Like, Alabama's here doing things that, you know, most people don't know them for, right? Like, the offense hasn't really been clicking. They haven't hit shots. The offense has been stagnant, struggled again from outside against Maryland. And you just look over the last month or so, 6 of the last 8 offensive performances against Power 5 opponents, Bama's fallen short of offensive expectation, but somehow they were good enough on a bad night to outscore Maryland by 24 the final 30 minutes. And I think the same thing rings true for me. Like San Diego State was fortunate, to cover against Charleston and then just out-athleted Furman. Our view of the Mountain West has not changed this tournament. And I just wonder, if this is the time you want to back that conference against an elite team where you don't have an athletic advantage. That's typically why San Diego State does so well in the Mountain West. This one, I think, all about dictating style, right? Alabama plays at a breakneck speed, top 5 in the country. San Diego State wants to slow it down outside the top 240 in both tempo and points per transition possession. Biggest key for me, though, like Quinterly and Sears, they need to kind of up their playmaking ability, especially if Brandon Miller, isn't 100%. We'll see how that ultimately unfolds. San Diego State does a fantastic job getting back on defense. It is easier to slow a game down than speed one up. I really believe that. So, I would expect more of a half-court game here. And the one area where the Aztecs struggle defensively is when ball handlers attack and dribble drive off pick and roll. So again, Quinterly and Sears need to up their playmaking ability here. I think relative to San Diego State having a top 5 defense, they're not overly great inside. You have Mensah, who's a rim protector, top 20 nationally in block percentage, but barely inside the top 100 in near proximity attempts allowed, barely inside the top 200 in points per shot at the rim in a half-court setting. So I think Alabama needs to really think about getting the ball inside a little more rather than taking a ton of jumpers, because San Diego State, they do a good job contesting jump shots, top 10 in the country there. Just a weird game for me because metrically, right, it's showing about a 1-point value on the Aztecs. Just can't back the Mountain West in this spot. And I think this kind of, if Alabama, to Slay's point, just clicks on both ends of the court, this could get a little ugly.
And let me add to that, the difference with Alabama, too, that nobody else has is a guy like Brandon Miller. Reason being because he tilts the scale. In those games where Alabama is playing bad or not making shots or not defending, and somebody else doing a great job, like at Arkansas. Arkansas played a really good game and had them, but it took 2 possessions of a guy like Devo Davis to lose Brandon Miller. And he made 2 3-pointers and blew the game over. In the SEC tournament, I believe it was in the championship, Texas A&M came back and made a hell of a run. And they battling. They got it. What happens? Brandon Miller gets 2 wide-open transition threes. I don't know how you lost them, but he does not miss those open shots. So that's the thing. Like, you may play great for 38 minutes, and then the spread still be hit by 12 or 13 because you lost the guy that can tilt the scales. And everybody doesn't have a scale tilter like Alabama does in Brandon Miller.
I'm not a massive trends guy when it comes to the NCAA tournament because there's so much turnover by conference, by roster, and by coaching. But when you get a significant sample size like we have for the Mountain West going back into the early 2000s, this is a conference performing right around a 30% success rate, even a shade less ATS when they play opponents from Power 5 conferences in the Big Dance. And Payne, I think it just further highlights what you've been preaching over the last couple of years. They don't see athletes. They don't see defenses like this on a night in, night out basis. And it's what has allowed San Diego State under Steve Fisher and now Brian Dutcher to elevate their level of play, to get in your face, take advantage of that tenacity. Going from Furman to Alabama is a hell of a jolt to the system, and we'll see if they can make those adjustments over 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, I mean, just completely agree with you there. It's like, they are the most athletic team in that conference. They play a style that conference just isn't used to seeing, and it's why they continue to overwhelm everyone. But, Brandon Miller hitting shots from the outside, that'll be key. I just hope Bama is smart enough on focusing on getting closer shots and not just settling for jump shots here.
Slay, before we get into your best story that you feel comfortable sharing in this space about your time in the NCAA tournament. We're not going to open it up to your entire time as a basketball player at Tennessee, because then we might have to change the rating. We'd have to go from PG-13 potentially to rated R. But, should we be penciling in 3 SEC teams into the Final Four? Are you officially drinking that Kool-Aid and see a path for Arkansas, Tennessee, and of course Alabama all going to Houston?
I don't see why not, man. I honestly think the Tennessee game, I think Tennessee is the only one, because you'll run up against a guy like Izzo, and that'll be the clash of two styles similar in Rick Barnes and Coach Izzo. Like, they're going to battle. They're going to beat each other up. The game might be 47-43 at the final. Who knows? But then you look at Arkansas and UConn. I just like the length, man. I like the length of Arkansas playing against UConn and being able to throw the bodies. I think that's why they advance. And I don't think their freshmen can continue to play bad. Alabama, they are who they are. San Diego State ain't never seen nothing like this. So, yes.
All right, we need a quick story because I know you're a man on the clock. You got your Orange Theory, your Pilates classes, whatever the hell else you got going on a Wednesday morning. But give us the best Slay memory of what it was like to play in the NCAA tournament, because it's nothing I'm ever going to experience firsthand. It's nothing Payne ever experienced, and a lot of our listeners like to live vicariously through some of those players we grew up watching.
Two things, man. One, I lost in the Sweet 16. I lost in the Sweet 16, man, against North Carolina. We had North Carolina beat. I'm talking about paying attention to great detail. We got it locked in. They got Brandon Haywood, Ed Cota, Joe Forte, Jason Capel, Julius Peppers coming off the bench, Big Chris Lane. They got a mob. So they ready to roll. We ready to roll. We coming through the tunnel, and I'm talking trash. I mean, cash, money, trash to them in the tunnel. Like, we know we're going to beat them. So Phil Ford, me and him talked after when I went to go work out for the Charlotte Hornets, and he was like, "Man, we remember you, man." We kept on saying, "Man, what's wrong with this dude, man? Why he keep talking?" He said, "We just kept telling our guys, don't listen to him. So we get out there on the floor and we got him beat. Man, Payne, Furman, I'm telling you, if Brandon Haywood never fouls out, we beat him without question. It's kind of like this UConn situation. Sedona, he's Brandon Haywood. He's dominant down low. Haywood is not doing anything. We got bodies to throw at him. He fouls out the game. It puts the ball in Ed Cota's hands. Ed Cota turns into a magician, man. We kind of go cold a little bit. And, man, it was Joe Forte had a hell of a freshman run on that one. So it was kind of, bittersweet in that situation. That was the only time I ever got my hook shot blocked also. Julius Peppers came from the weak side. You can't block a hook shot, first of all. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar showed you that. I shoot a hook shot. This man at 6'5" came from the weak side and blocked my shot over me and Chris Lang, who is 6'10", 6'11", and put it in the stands. And I'm sitting there looking like, you're not even supposed to be out here. Like, you play football, my man. Like, what are you doing out here running around all wild and stuff? So that's one story. And then to cap it off, we beat UConn to make it to the Sweet 16, the defending champs. You know what we did after?
I'm afraid to ask, Slay, but I know you're going to tell all of our loyal listeners, so lay it on us, buddy.
That's right. In true Big Slay fashion, man, after that, Yin Yang Twins was shooting a video down in Birmingham, Alabama, and we went to the Whistle While You Twerk video shoot after that. So we got one of us, I ain't gonna say who, somebody got maced, and we had to get in the limo and drive back to the hotel and try to get back before we were supposed to leave in the morning. But great time, man. Shout out to the Yin Yang Twins, man, making our Sweet 16 birth all worth it in Birmingham, Alabama.
Hey, those are the kind of opportunities you take advantage of. And Payne, I'll admit, for the couple of years that I've been working with Slay, doing his radio show and such, that's the first time he's actually admitted to being humbled at one point on the basketball court. So I'm glad it took a unique physical specimen in Julius Peppers to be able to pull that off. So at least for one moment in Slay's adult life, as he's flirting with 42, 43 years of age, the man remembers what it felt like to be the rest of us out there, albeit on a slightly bigger stage.
It took a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, well, that's what it takes sometimes. It takes a Hall of Famer to slow one down. You, of course, can follow Ron Slay on Twitter at @TheRonSlay. Like I said, you can listen to him Monday through Friday on 3HL 104.5 The Zone in Nashville, and make sure you check him out on the SEC Network. He is a rapidly rising media sensation. Slay, I want you to become the Charles Barkley of college basketball on the SEC Network. So if you can make that happen, just remember us as your star rapidly rises, and I'll do everything I can to push Grant Hill out of the booth at CBS so you can be out there calling a Final Four right alongside Nance and Rafter, hopefully 5-8 years from now.
Let's go, baby. I'm looking forward to. Hey, man, I got to give a shout out, man, to all my Oak Hill Academy Warriors that's in the tournament. So I'm not saying that Michigan State is going to be the team we playing. I'm just throwing that out there. I got Kansas State winning. Keontae Johnson ain't no story like it. Marquise Noel, trust me. Kansas State, I'm telling you right, this is free. You ain't got to pay for this. Kansas State is beating Michigan State. Book it.
You know, see, Payne, that's how I know he's a media guy, because it's the perfect segue into the game we're going to cover next. Slay, enjoy the games this weekend, my friend. As long as we're not betting against the Vols, we'll be rooting for you.
Hi, fellas. Peace.
It's always great, Payne, when you get that kind of perspective from someone like Slay, who, I say it and I joke and like to bust his chops, but I'm thrilled to see him get an opportunity with the SEC network. Charismatic, outspoken, and the man loves to talk his college hoops, which is evident with us. Drinking some of that SEC Kool-Aid, even against Tennessee's most bitter rivals.
Just a good dude. And, everything that he was talking about within the breakdowns that he sees visually was bang on in terms of the metrics, and that's why it's really good to get a different voice and viewpoint on something we had, a while back on the college football podcast, where if the eye test to a former player matches with the metrics, you're in pretty good shape there. He mentioned one thing on the way out, and I didn't want to turn this into like a weird moment, but he mentioned even, busting out of the tournament to UNC, and 20 years later it seems evident that getting the ball in the hands of a college level Hall of Fame point guard Ned Cota was substantially more efficient than having Brandon Haywood operate out of the post. But the other interesting thing we kind of talked about off air is like Slay was an undersized big man, and my guess is I was going to ask him if, and maybe you do that today when you join him on the show, it's like what he thinks about this day and age, because his game translates to the current state of basketball as an undersized big far better than it did.
Well,
back
and
then.
that was the one thing that blew me away. I mean, I talked about pumping his tires up a little bit, looked at his stat line. I had no idea he was so proficient from beyond the arc. And to your point, clearly ahead of his time, had a very successful career in Europe, never really got his cup of coffee in the NBA, but a great guy through and through, and it's always fun talking to him. Obviously we put the best product we can forward facing, but some of the stories Slay has shared with us in our time with him, probably not appropriate for general consumption, and we'll keep Slay's secret safe. You mentioned big men. The Purdue Boilermakers don't even allow their All-American big man to get a touch in the final 7 minutes, and I wanted to talk about it at the top. Every now and again, when we go through brackets or the NFL or college football, you need certain dominoes to fall to set up what you think are going to be big bets. I'm still pissed off that Purdue couldn't just get the straight-up win against FDU, allowing us to absolutely unload on whoever came out of that FAU-Memphis game as an underdog against an overvalued Purdue side.
Yeah, completely agree there. The most difficult part, as crazy as it sounds, is like picking the team that's going to upset Purdue. Was it going to be Memphis? Was it going to be FAU? That 1 point decision in the bracket life, really boggled my brain there. But boy, the East just got flipped upside down. I don't have either any points remaining in the East region of any of my brackets there. We knew it would be chaotic, just wasn't quite sure who it would be. Everyone kind of left Tennessee for dead, and they struggled. Could have easily lost in their opening round matchup, then pulled it together against Duke, got some positive variance with the officiating crew. We knew Purdue was a little bit of a fraud. Kentucky, a game that we'll talk about here in a little bit. I think they probably were the deserving team to advance when you look at how things unfolded, but did not. And then Shaka Smart continues his struggles in the
yeah,
NCAA
I think I
tournament.
had Duke and Kentucky playing in the Elite Eight for the right to go to the Final Four. And since we tell you about our wins, we tell you about our losses around these parts. Payne was in a Survivor contest for the first time in college basketball. No rules, no real stipulations, small group. I figure, you know what? I'm not going to use Purdue again after their opening round game. I use Purdue. They can't even win as a 23-point favorite. So that's my opening experience with college basketball Survivor in a nutshell. Our folks and loyal listeners can make fun of me all they want.
Stubborn human. You did not contact me for help. You also, we just shit on Purdue for like the last month, saying this team has the same issues it's had for a couple years. The one thing that we'll say, like overarching, kind of reeling this back in a little bit, is like the right side of the brackets, right? The Midwest, the West, everything was pretty much spot on. We talked about the West having, I believe 5 of our top 14 power-rated teams, all of which have moved on, despite the joking about Eric Musselman. I think you and I both thought Arkansas was as live as ever
100%.
against Kansas. And, the right side of the bracket in prognostication, for that, intro podcast was pretty bang on, and hopefully we can deliver the same rate.
Hey,
of
I'm thrilled.
accuracy here.
I mean, as a guy who get to go to the West region out here in Vegas for the first time to see the 2 matchups we have, I couldn't have been happier with the way things played out. Cinderella stories are great until you have to see some of those 15 and 16 seeds live and in person, like I did in the old days. Wanted to build on what you talked about.
They're only great until it's a close game and there's like 5 or 6 minutes left.
Right,
Really,
exactly. And then you wanted to see the blue bloods emerge. You want to see all the heavyweights go out there and absolutely battle. An upset or two is great the opening weekend, but I want the best teams playing for a national championship late. Wanted to further support what you talked a little bit about early with some of the unders. This year is on track to feature the worst three-point shooting in the history of the NCAA tournaments, with teams making just 31.2% from deep through the first 2 rounds. The worst mark for a completed tournament was 31.8%, actually set last year. Before that was 32% way back in 2001. And the one thing that we've seen going all the way back to 2000 through last year's edition, teams made 34% prior to the Sweet 16, but saw that number dip closer to 33%. So something to keep tabs on as we begin to look at these games. But Slay set us up perfectly, talking about some of the ties that one of these programs has to Oak Hill Academy. And of course, that being the Kansas State Wildcats, who will take on a familiar face in Tom Izzo and Michigan State. You're looking at Michigan State, a 2-point favorite at Madison Square Garden on Thursday afternoon, total of 138 in that contest. And Payne, when you look at the path Sparty took to get here, look, they took care of USC, extending their lead in the second half with a +8 advantage from the charity stripe. Held the Trojans to just 45% shooting from inside the arc, and they were the beneficiary of taking on an underachieving Shaka Smart in the big dance, knocking off Marquette 69-60, whereas Kansas State, they go through Montana State. They have a very impressive close of the game against Kentucky, but you look at this edition of the Wildcats, and they've taken money against in each of the 2 games. When you begin to assess 2 teams that we probably didn't expect to be here, do you feel there's one matchup that can be exploited more than anything else?
Yeah, I mean, what's so interesting here is like going back to what we just said moments ago. It's like we called for all this chaos in the East region. We got it. I think, our hope was, an Elite 8 matchup that featured Duke and Kentucky. Instead, you get 2 teams power rated outside our top 32 here vying for the Elite 8, which just kind of makes Alabama's trek to the finals all that much easier. Substantial coaching edge, I think, for Izzo that probably gets magnified a little bit with extra prep. Kansas State beating Kentucky on the surface might seem expected based on their seed line, but there's a reason Kentucky was favored, and everything to me went Kansas State's way. I mean, Kentucky blew an 8-point second half lead, and then with about 12 minutes to go, I know we're texting back and forth, Kentucky was in the bonus the rest of the half. And it took Reeves and Toppin going a combined 2 for 22 from the floor. And it still was a bunch of contested deep threes late for Kansas State to win, the variance trip to the Sweet 16. I wonder how Michigan State consistently scores here. That's probably the thing that would be worried about here. I know they took some early money. They don't try to get easy buckets. They're outside the top 300 in tempo. They only push the ball in 14% of their possessions. That's outside the top 200. And in the half court, Tyson Walker is solid, but there really isn't like a go-to shot maker. Hauser is kind of the straw that stirs the drink, and Sparty's offense really was stagnant with Hauser off the floor. But the very best part of Kansas State basketball season is their half-court defense, right? They allow 0.8 points per half-court possession, top 15 in the country. Sparty's shot selection is really iffy at times. They shoot the 3 well. They just don't attempt threes at a rate that's really high in the landscape of college basketball. They're solid around the basket. They attempt, proximity shots at a rate, outside the top 300 in the country as well. So they're good in there. They just don't take a lot, so all of their shots typically are in the mid-range variety for Michigan State, top 20 in the country there. Kansas State top 30 defending that area of the court, top 30 defending catch and shoot jump shots as well, which basically is what Sparty lives on. And so I don't necessarily know if I agree with the early movement. And we saw Michigan State open as low as pick. We're now out to 2. Chris kind of trending back towards 1.5. We'll ultimately see when some of the larger players in the market get involved. But I kind of get the vibe here is if this somehow goes to 2.5, there's going to be a different sentiment from some other respected bettors who are saying, hey, we'll take 3 minus 20 here. And it just feels like maybe the Izzo factor is so prevalent, is so respected that the market is kind of overvaluing Michigan State here a little bit. And again, the matchup on that side of the ball, I do wonder how Michigan
It's just
State
wild
scores.
to see. I mean, we talked about the Big Ten being paper tigers, and no knock for some of our most loyal listeners that are Northwestern grads. When Northwestern is your 2 seed after the regular season's completed, it's not a ringing endorsement for the expectations for the league at large, and that's why Michigan State, the lone Big Ten team, still playing on into the Sweet 16. You look at Kansas State, a homecoming of sorts for their top 2 players, one of their top players, I should say, Marquise Noel and Tomlin, both coming from Harlem. Tyson Walker from Westbury, New York, not too far from the city, but Jerome Tang deserves a ton of credit for what he's been able to accomplish in his first season in the Little Apple, taking his team to the Big Apple, knowing that Scott Drew's defense at Baylor really fell off a cliff, and Kansas State has been the beneficiary of that when you look at the Wildcats making their first Sweet 16 appearance since 2018. Also, Thursday night, we talked about the Arkansas-UConn game earlier, so the late game at T-Mobile in Las Vegas will pit familiar foes against one another, UCLA and Gonzaga. We've seen UCLA move from a pick'em where this number opened now to a 2-point favorite. Not a whole lot of movement on the total. That number has sat right around 146. 8th straight Sweet 16 appearances for the Gonzaga Bulldogs, tied for the 3rd longest all time. 4th time these programs will meet in the tournament since 2004. The most recent, of course, back in 2021, an instant classic, a 93-90 Gonzaga overtime win in the Final Four. You look at the Bruins, if they win in the Sweet 16, this is a program that loves prosperity, 19-3 all-time in the Elite Eight. And when you look at Gonzaga overall, 24 NCAA tournament wins since 2015, 3 more than any other program. They have been the model of consistency. Payne, we know some of the names on this Gonzaga roster. Drew Timme, of course, being one. Julian Strother being the other player that's going to have to carry the baton offensively. But this UCLA team, no slouch defensively. And if there's one area that you have question marks about when it comes to Mark Few's team, it's not anything they do at the offensive end, but are they able to get stops against Jaime Jaquez and a UCLA offense that has the capabilities to go off?
Always interesting when we start to deep dive some of these games and you go down wormholes because you're trying to find a path or something underlying that the market might not necessarily be factoring. And so this was like the game for me because, to your point, UCLA's taken some early money. Wildly contrasting styles here. Although, Gonzaga is quietly a touch slower this season, right? 40th in adjusted tempo. It was a top 5 pace team last year with an NBA level point guard. Very different for Mick Cronin, right? He wants his Bruins to play methodical, right? In the half court, walk the ball up, be physical. And it's just interesting knowing some of the injuries that UCLA is dealing with for them to take early money. Gonzaga, though, you look, their 5 losses this season came against teams that slowed the game down, which again is what UCLA wants to do. Purdue and St. Mary's are snails, both outside the top 320 in pace. Baylor outside the top 200. Loyola outside the top 180. Even Texas now outside the top 100. The teams that played the game close to their pace and slow it down have given, Gonzaga some trouble. And I think that's ultimately going to be a factor here is who plays this game at their pace. I think what's really interesting here is both are power rated in our top 10, but you kind of glance at the rosters, both have glaring holes. And I think, for UCLA, Jalen Clark being out, right? David Singleton rolled his ankle late in the Northwestern game. How healthy is he going to be? Bona and Bailey are freshmen that are going to be asked to, play elevated roles. Tiger Campbell probably isn't as good as perception. And then for Gonzaga, it's they don't really have great guard play or a floor general. So they've struggled against athletic teams that can get after them on the perimeter. And then, all of a sudden that's been their Achilles heel. And then you think back to the Bama game earlier this season, which was like an offensive clinic. And you're wondering how the hell they did that. So it's very weird, right? On paper, You look at some of these matchups, nearly 40% of Gonzaga's offensive possessions are post-ups and pick and roll, and they're top 20 in efficiency using both. Getting Drew Timme, to your point at the top, the ball and the post, and kind of just letting him be quick and crafty is pretty vital. Kind of let him pick on a freshman and Bona down low. Now, UCLA, you look at what Mick Cronin's done there. They've been damn good defending ball screens and pick and rolls. This is a game, though, where you may feel the loss of Jalen Clark finally. UCLA's also been pretty good defending post-ups. Cronin showed an ability where he just does not have a problem or an issue doubling the post and sending help. So, this side of the court, theoretically good on good. I think you'll know pretty quickly what version of Julian Strother you get and how missed Clark is going to be for UCLA, because if that becomes the dynamic where it's like, wow, Clark really matters in a game of this magnitude as we step up in class, and suddenly you're getting the good Julian Strother who really kind of elevates Gonzaga's game to another level, that could be a little bit problemsome for UCLA. Gonzaga, though, defensively, you hit perfectly, is just an absolute
They outscore their problems. I mean, that's the simple way to look at it. They have to outscore their defensive deficiencies.
Yeah, I mean, metrically, the worst Mark Few has had since 2007. And I do wonder, right, like if UCLA will selectively try and get out, right? They don't want this game to be a track meet, but when UCLA does elect to push, they're wildly efficient. Top 5 in transition points per possession, and Gonzaga just refuses to get back. Just teams don't really push against them because they're afraid of not just the one or two back and forths, but suddenly you find yourself in like this 4 or 5 minute stretch where it's just like helter-skelter, and you're like, shit, we're playing what Gonzaga wants to play. But if you can selectively do it, there's an opportunity to get a cheap basket or two. Mick Cronin, when they're in the half court, loves running, pick and roll offense, and teams typically try and ball screen Gonzaga to death and force Drew Timme to get involved in those situations where he struggles, right? He's not like the most athletic guy, but you also kind of want to get him in some foul trouble and put him in some decision making where he's either going to be a matador or he's going to, take the foul and hopefully, you get him on the bench. Jaime Jaquez is huge here. Really, I think needs to focus on not settling for the mid-range jumpers, but being active down low and in the post and playing physical. Gonzaga's outside the top 300 in points allowed per post-up possession as well. This very much feels like a game, too, where we could see potentially Amari Bailey grow up right in front of our eyes, right? If he's willing to be an attacker occasionally in transition and just push it, he's also the guy that can create his own shot and play ISO. Those are two areas, again, where Gonzaga is outside the top 300 defensively in transition and defending ISO. So, a lot to ask of a freshman, probably in the biggest game of his life. But, we might be able to see him grow up in front of our eyes. And if he has that game where he's attacking, again, in transition a little bit and is the guy that can get them a shot with ISO ball, I think, I think UCLA might be too physical, but you'll know pretty quickly, right? Like, how big are the injuries for UCLA? That's kind of what's
until you watch Gonzaga this season, I don't think you realize. I went back and watched the tournament games last year, and I know they got knocked out a lot earlier than people anticipated against Arkansas, but the kind of difference that a player like Chen Holmgren could make at the rim. He just couldn't get to the rack. He was able to defend the interior, and they don't have that guy now. To your point, Drew Timme's got to stay on the floor because if he ends up in foul trouble, there's not enough reliable interior scoring there. And you saw an athletic guard last week in Mike Miles go absolutely nuclear with an offensive rating a shade under 150. UCLA has a variety of players there. They're going to throw bodies at Timme, and they're going to use up every single foul they can with bigs on that roster.
What do you make of Gonzaga's guards? Because it's wild. We saw the downgrade, right, from Suggs to Nembhard, but Nembhard's starting for the Indiana Pacers right now in the NBA. It's like they don't also have that floor general, it doesn't seem to me. But I don't know what their guards are either. Like, they just haven't shown to be consistent. Now, they're good knockdown jump shooters. They can shoot the ball. It just doesn't seem like they have that floor general if they're going to get stuck in a half-court matchup. But again, all of a sudden, like, you have that anomaly performance against Alabama, and you're like, Jesus, that's the potential. That's what's in the tank, possibly. And it's very scary.
Well, and that's the whole thing. When you look at a player like Rasir Bolton that has the ball in his hands a lot more now than he did even when he was at Iowa State, depending on how you look at the distinction from shooting guard to point guard. Not an elite level guy by any stretch of the imagination. So Gonzaga feels like it's a sum of all parts more so than an individual that takes over games. And, in games of this magnitude, sometimes you need that guy that can have the alpha dominance. It's been Drew Timme in the past, but can he do it against UCLA, knowing that the Bruins will have a few extra days to properly prepare to knock Gonzaga off and end the nation's longest winning streak that currently sits at 11. From Thursday into Friday night, and it's the Houston Cougars at T-Mobile Center in Kansas City, Missouri, taking on the Miami Hurricanes. Houston, a 7-point favorite, total in the game, 138.5. Miami has thrived so far this season as underdogs, going 7-2 ATS in 9 opportunities. Meanwhile, the Cougars a little bit overvalued of late, 3-7 ATS, 1-1 in the tournament, coming nowhere close to covering against Northern Kentucky and using a dominant second half against Auburn to get outside the number. The opportunity obviously remains for Houston, with the Final Four being held at NRG Stadium. The last school to play a Final Four in its home city was Butler in Indianapolis back in 2010, ultimately succumbing to Duke in the national title. Meanwhile, Kansas won the 1988 national title in Kansas City, Missouri, less than an hour from its Lawrence campus. ACC, we talked about it being a down year, but death taxes and Jim Larinaga getting more out of a team that nobody expects, and that's the Miami Hurricanes, who keep the ACC streak alive, 43rd straight tournaments that they've sent at least one team to the Sweet 16. From a pace standpoint, two teams that are polar opposites. Houston wants to operate slow and methodical. Miami would like to push it a little bit with their guard-dominated offense. Houston, defensive efficiency inside the top 5. Miami outside the top 100. And when you look at the way Houston goes about things offensively, we've talked about it for years under Kelvin Sampson. They're going to attack the offensive glass with reckless abandon. Payne, the guard play for Miami has been a bit of a revelation. You talked about how they're probably fortunate to be here with that 16-1 run. They needed to dispatch Drake in the opening round, but they come out, they look dominant against Indiana. Now a definite step up in class where they better bring their big boy pants, because Houston's going to try and beat you up for the better part of 40 minutes.
I mean, that was the perfect depiction of what Miami is. And that's why they're a really interesting team, because they have the key components we look for this time of year. Great coach, really good guards. And quietly, Miami has one of the top 10 5-man lineups in the entire country in terms of adjusted efficiency margin when you look at Wong, Poplar, Pack, O'Meara, and Miller. And I think that's really the only hope Miami has, is those guards of Pack and Wong and that 5-out offense attacking and constantly cutting. Yes, like Sheed and Sasser looked much healthier against Auburn. They get a fortunate schedule break where Houston played this past Saturday and then got the Friday game this week. Neither, I don't think, are going to be 100%, so it'll just be interesting to see if Sheed and Sasser can stay in front without fouling. But that attacking and cutting offense has to be the core focus for Miami, right? It's just what they do. They're top 15 offense in points per cut possession, and that's the lone weakness defensively for Houston. They have a terrible time recovering from some of their mistakes. They're outside the top 300 in points allowed per cut possession. That's really it. Now, you said it perfectly, right? Like, Miami probably should have been bounced by a damn good Drake team in the opening round. They were down like 6 with 3 minutes to go. And then all the positive variants hit against Indiana, where Miami exceeds expectation on points scored from threes, on rim finishes. Miami somehow grabbed 51% of their missed shots against Indiana as well. And you just saw a completely different team who kind of got their wake-up call. I think it's a huge difference here against Houston, though. Like, overall, the Cougars are the most efficient half-court defense in the country. They're fantastic defending catch-and-shoot situations along with pick and roll. And the one thing we've seen this season, Miami has struggled against good defenses. So when they step up in class, they've struggled with length and size and athleticism, all things that Houston has in spades. Offensively, I think Houston starts to find a little bit more success. I know the first 2 games haven't led to a ton of open shots created, and you can see that in some of the shot quality data, but I think their health's a little bit improved. I think they have a time to refocus a little bit here, and the lack of size and height, I think, should hinder Miami, and that will bode well for Houston here. You just look at the lineup, right? Miami goes 5'11", 6'3", 6'5", 6'7", and 6'7". The Hurricanes are outside the top 300 in points per possession in the half court. Miami plays really aggressive on the perimeter. It kind of leaves them susceptible to some poor closeouts. I think you look at Miami defensively, they struggle with pick and roll. They're horrific defending the paint and horrific defending the rim. Houston should be able to score inside, score at the rim. Miami just hasn't fared well against teams that can crash the glass either. I just, all told here, Miami's outside the top 300. Defending post-up possessions, shots around the rim. Houston's second in the country in near proximity efficiency. They love crashing the offensive glass. Top 5 in the country there. They're elite scoring quick points off those second chance opportunities. Miami struggles rebounding their own glass. And so you're trying to find a path here, and certainly it's a good game plan from Larrañaga. It's just elite guard play. It's, potentially Sheed and Sasser not being 100% and able to stay in front of Miami's guards. But you just look across the board, like Houston's flat out owned teams and blew the doors off them when they defend the paint poorly this season. And I think ultimately that's a little bit too much for Miami here. The market has kind of had its say, right? We opened a couple shops at 6, 6.5. 7 is a key number in basketball. It's kind of, the distinguished point of teams where they stop fouling late in games. Who knows if that's the case in a setting like this, but 7 has some relevance. And kind of the point here is like a little bit of a setup initially. And as soon as we got to 6.5, really, really respected money and laid it with Houston. It's why we're out to 7.5 most places now.
Well, as someone, along with the rest of our loyal Bet the Board listeners who are on Houston to make the Elite Eight at minus $1.25, let's hope that second half against Auburn is a harbinger of things to come compared to the first 3 halves of basketball we saw from the Cougars.
What'd you make of that?
I thought that was exactly how Houston was going to play the entire game against Auburn, quite frankly. And they woke up, they realized, hey, look, Auburn doesn't have any shot makers out there. And you saw Houston just go to town. I mean, it felt like a 14 or 15-minute stretch where Auburn had 2 made field goals. And if it wasn't some of that home cooking and the officials that may have been placating that Birmingham crowd, I mean, Auburn loses that game by 20 to 25 points if it's not a fall parade. But credit to Houston. And I think, honestly, if you can get out of an environment like that and get a little bit of a scare, those are good things because iron sharpens iron, and you want a team that has the national championship capabilities like the Houston Cougars to deal with that kind of environment, emerge unscathed, and show the level of basketball they are capable of playing when they get pushed, hoping some of that momentum carries forward into a region that, if they do get through Miami, could give them their hands full, whoever emerges from the next game we're about to break down between Xavier and Texas.
Yeah, I mean, they the right side of the bracket is just a raw deal. Any of those elite teams could come out and make the championship, and that's kind of why Alabama has a walk. But that's the one thing that I noticed. Houston was very much, I don't want to say going through the motions, but finding their footing against Northern Kentucky in a game that we thought they would kind of handle pretty easily. It wasn't quite the case. And then you get this, I would kind of say, lethargic start to the Auburn game, although if you kind of just watch how the first half ended where Auburn makes their run, it's like somewhat fraudulent, right? It's like a deep contested 3 from 30 feet, 8 seconds into the shot clock. It's not actual good offense. It's missing the front end of 3 1-and-1s for Houston, and suddenly the lead kind of balloons out to 10. But what was just so interesting to me is we saw that extra gear. And you think about what transpired, and sure, you can say like, Auburn shot poorly in the second half from the floor and from the free throw line. Okay, that's just what they do. They're not a good shooting team. They don't have great guard play. But what was really interesting to me is like you have an officiating crew that sent Auburn to the line nearly 30 times in the second half. It's a road environment. And then all of a sudden you look up and you're at like the 11-minute mark, and Sheed and Sasser, your top 2 guards, are like on the bench in foul trouble. And you find another gear from some guys that you didn't really expect to step up. Roberts didn't even play well in that game. So it just felt like when you think about Houston as a national title contender a couple of times over the last few years, where were they going to find that extra gear? Were they talented enough? Were they deep enough? And it just felt like all those questions got answered.
Yeah, in the second half, Auburn scores 23 points. Tremont Mark scores 20. So usually a good sign for Houston when you have the first Houston Cougar with 26-plus points, 9-plus rebounds in an NCAA tournament game since Akeem Olajuwon accomplished that feat back in 1984. When you look at the winner of that game, they'll take on the winner of this game between Xavier and Texas, a matchup where Texas is a 4-point favorite. There are some 4.5s out there in the market. 149, more or less, the consensus on the total. For when you dig into some of the metrics here, all about pace and tempo. Xavier, 33rd in the country, 42nd in average possession length. One of the best from beyond the arc, but they don't defend it well. Shoot the ball, 3rd best offensive efficiency-wise from deep. Outside the top 250 when it comes to defending the triple. They, of course, got their wake-up call in the first half against Kennesaw State. were obviously able to put together a much better second half and then shot the lights out against Pittsburgh, albeit against the Panthers side that doesn't really provide much in the way of defensive resistance. Meanwhile, Texas's trip to get here took care of Colgate in pretty easy fashion, covering that number, and then needed to hang on late when Penn State put together a run, let a big lead dissipate to 3 points with less than 5 minutes remaining. But Dylan Daisu, outstanding. 28 points, 10 rebounds. You have a couple of guys in Marcus Carr and Timmy Allen that are 2,000-point scorers. There are only 5 of them in the tournament. 2 of them play in the burnt orange jerseys. Rodney Terry against Sean Miller, Payne. That may be a good place to start here. Terry thrust into this role of the unfortunate circumstances around Chris Beard and his decision-making off the court. Sean Miller trying to resurrect his career at the spot that jump-started it in Xavier after what unfolded at Arizona. Is there a coaching edge to be found, or do you look more at some of the X's and O's and the players out there, knowing one team has an edge in terms of athletes and playmakers?
Yeah, I think that's the big question mark here. And, kind of forget why Sean Miller's at Xavier if you can do that and just think about him as a basketball coach. And he's damn good. He's elite. And, some of the stuff that Miller was found guilty of is very much commonplace in the NCAA. It's been going on for 20 years.
And now it's endorsed by NIL. So
yeah. Yes. So, what he's done with the talent at Xavier in this short period of time. And then, lose a key cog in Zach Fremantle and just not skipping a beat. It's so impressive. But I thought Xavier was overseeded, right? More like a middling 4 seed than a 3 seed. Kennesaw State led by 13 in the opening round against Xavier with 9 minutes to go. Round 2, Xavier gets Pittsburgh, who was power rated outside our top 55 and was playing its 3rd game in 5 days and only goes 6 deep to begin with. To me, Texas feels completely different. Just the overarching vibe, right? Like they're a 2 seed, but nobody's talking about them as a team with a chance to cut down the nets. Like I just haven't heard anyone talking about them at that level, and we have them power rated 6th best in the country. And the way Texas is playing right now, to me, is really impressive. They've lost twice since February 14th, both away games, at Baylor and TCU, 2 top 25 teams. TCU was kind of a dark horse to make the Elite 8, and that was a 2-point game. Texas just haven't lost sense, right? Pasted Kansas twice. And I understand that, Kansas probably wasn't a 1 seed, but that's still pretty impressive. The last time, as a 3-point dog in the Big 12 championship game, and win that by 20. And then in the first round, it's like all I heard was Colgate this, Colgate that, won by 20. And then you get the Penn State performance, which actually impressed me. And I think that's sometimes, kind of how you want to view some of these teams, not when they're playing their very best, but what do they do when they're performing, not to the level of expectation? Can they still find a way to win? Can they still find an aspect of their game that we might not have known or was on the surface level that could propel them? And suddenly, Penn State was playing their best basketball of the season. Texas did not play overly well in that game. And, Texas wins by 5. So it finishes kind of right within odds maker expectation. But to land 5, right, Penn State has to hit a 4-point play with seconds left. Texas has to miss the front end of a 1-and-1. And then you think about this, Texas was 1 for 11 from 3. And they still win this game. And they still should have covered it. And I think that's potentially why you find a little value here in this matchup. You also, kind of going back to your main question as I went left, there's a data point from 2016 where Rodney Terry is coaching at Fresno State, and Fresno State goes into Arizona against Sean Miller, led at halftime, led by 4 with 12 minutes to play as a 13-point underdog. Fresno lost the game by basically the margin they were outscored from the free throw line. It's one data point, not putting a ton of value in it, but it's at least nice to see Rodney Terry can take a far less talented team and come up with something to kind of outwit Sean Miller. So this might not be the coaching mismatch some perceive it to potentially be. And now, I would argue that potentially Rodney Terry has the talent advantage here. On the court, Xavier wants to speed this game up. They play faster than Texas, but Texas is actually top 15 in transition points per possession allowed, right? They have no issues playing faster. In the half court, Xavier struggles defensively, right? Outside the top 200 in points per half court possession. Sean Miller likes to pack it in defensively, right? So it's going to be a game where, Carr has to take advantage of some open looks. His game is really grown in some pick and roll situations, especially as a passer. Texas doesn't have a ton of great shooters. They shoot it okay, but they do a really nice job creating space for shots around the basket. So you want to spread Xavier's pack line defense out here. I think that's vital. If Texas can do that, they'll have success cutting. Something Xavier is terrible defending, right? Because they're so aggressive contesting shots. Xavier has also been beat up in the post, inside at times. It's an area where Texas is quite efficient. You mentioned Dessou really has come on down the stretch. There was a post-game interview in that Penn State final there where he was like, man, the guys have come up to me and just said, like, I need to be that dude. And you look at him, it's like, oh my God, this is like a physical specimen. He's long, he's lanky, he can, play inside, outside. Why isn't he getting the ball more? It seems like they're putting a really emphasis and kind of, putting their confidence in him, and within that, his confidence is growing on the basketball court, and he's starting to become a real factor there. I mentioned Xavier again wanting to speed games up. Texas has been fantastic defensively in transition. They get back extremely well, and then top 5 in points allowed per transition possession. So, the line is somewhat tight here. Our core number on this was 5. So we're a little, we're a touch higher than market consensus, but I think there's some things within this matchup that bode well for Texas.
And you mentioned Dessou. Some of the things that he was able to accomplish in that game against Penn State: became the first player in UT history to score 28 points and grab 10 boards in a tournament game. Was the most points by a UT player in a tournament game since Kevin Durant had 30 way back in 2007, and became just the second Texas player ever with a 25-10 performance in an NCAA tournament game, joining LaMarcus Aldridge, who accomplished that feat in 2006 in a Sweet 16 matchup against West Virginia. The final game that we'll see, well, not necessarily in terms of what time it will tip off, but the game that we'll break down in the round of 16 pits upstart Cinderella Princeton against the Creighton Blue Jays. And you're looking at Creighton as a 10-point consensus favorite across the board. Total sits at 140 in the nightcap in Louisville on Friday evening. Third straight season that a 15 seed has made the Sweet 16, and it only happened once ever prior to the last 3 seasons. First time that the Ivy League has been here since 2016. Mitch Henderson, interesting note here that has absolutely no impact on the overall handicap of this game, was either the point guard or the head coach for all 4 of Princeton's NCAA tournament wins since 1985. The 571 games played and started as a team, least experienced in the field for Princeton. But Payne, I'm not going to take anything away from what the Tigers have been able to accomplish, winning outright against Arizona, being the better basketball team for a full 40 against Missouri. But this could be a step up in class against a Blue Jays team that doesn't fall, is elite from an offensive efficiency standpoint, is elite from a defensive efficiency standpoint, and has a number of guys that are more than capable of filling it up on a nightly basis.
Princeton is just, really fun to watch. Well coached, smart basketball with Mitch Henderson. But they have some talent too, right? Like Tosan is a pro, flat out. And I can certainly understand if you're strictly a power numbers guy, how you could see some value in Princeton, at plus 10.5. Our core number was like 9.4. But I felt like Creighton was one of the more underseeded teams in the tournament. They were 11th in our power ratings coming into the tournament, and, were somehow a 6 seed. And by our numbers, Creighton was just one of 7 teams in the entire tournament with, top 25 efficiency rating on both offense and defense, which you kind of exhibited there at the top. And there's multiple guys that can get a bucket. Multiple guys can hit a 3-ball, can play inside out. Creighton does a fantastic job defending shots close to the rim defensively as well. And you have one of the better coaches in this tournament with Greg McDermott. And I think giving him extra time to prepare for kind of a quirky Princeton offense should help. And then you think about the first 2 matchups Princeton had. Missouri wants to get out in transition. They don't want to be slogged down in a half court. Missouri was 7th in their rate of possessions where they pushed the ball this season. Arizona certainly had a matchup advantage inside, and that's really if you're going to put them in the half court where they have some advantages, especially metrically when you think about, the Pac-12 as a conference as a whole, excluding UCLA playing physically. But Arizona also wants to kind of get out and push the ball, and that game is somehow played in the 50s. Both these games were very much Princeton style. They were able to dictate to the other team. Creighton, is an offense that has no issues playing in the half court. In fact, top 15 in the country in points per half court possession. Creighton's pick and roll game should do well here against a Princeton defense that's had trouble defending that's had trouble, I think, defending some interior rim shots, especially kind of when you start to factor it in, potentially playing, up in class here. My number doesn't get me to Creighton. But this really feels like the clear stopping point for Princeton in this tournament against a team that won't be completely mauled mentally. And I think that's probably the big distinguisher here.
Hey, those are some of the things you look for. I mean, these numbers this time of year, with 15 college basketball games remaining in the NCAA tournament, are going to be ultra efficient. So where can you find that nuance? Where can you find that tidbit to get you over the hump? I know a lot of folks out there want to try and have a side or total in all of these games. Unfortunately for what we do, opportunity doesn't always present itself as such. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, follow the Bet the Board podcast at Bet the Board Pod for updates across all of our great suite of products, from cardboard chat to Stay Green, trying to earn you money everywhere we can outside of football season. And Payne, maybe with a little bit of prophetic diagnosis earlier, we started to see some of the twos disappear on Michigan State at two of the sharper shops a while ago. So down to 1.5 there. Interested to see if that starts a domino effect as we get closer to that Thursday tip-off. But for those folks that have been with us at Bet the Board, they know this is the time of the show where we dig a little bit deeper. We've broken all the games down, but we try and identify and isolate the one most actionable element. We obviously have a very live Houston ticket, essentially a moneyline bet against Miami to cash last week's best bet. But where are we going in the round of 16, my friend?
I think we've toyed with this a little bit. We've gone back and forth a couple times, but I think we just kind of land on one of the games where we broke it down towards the end of this, and that's Xavier, Texas. Let's get out there. Let's lay it with Texas. Let's lay the 4 here. And I think there's some matchup advantages that I like. I'm not sure the Sean Miller, Rodney Terry coaching mismatch is as large as many think. And again, like, it's not the end all be all, but you have a nice data point with an undermanned Fresno team going into Arizona when Sean Miller was there and competing extremely well, leading at the half and then leading late in that game. And just being outscored wildly from the free throw line was the differentiator in that matchup. But I think Texas has the athletes here. I think we're getting a nice price based upon the result that Texas had against Penn State, even though they should have covered that spread despite shooting 1 for 11 from the three-point line. Xavier, to me, again, a little bit overseeded here. I mentioned that in the breakdown of that game, more of like a middling 4 seed than a 3. Has not impressed me, being down 13 to Kennesaw with 9 minutes to go there, and then catch a really undermanned Pittsburgh team playing 3 games in 5 days with a very, very small bench. And so I think Texas here is really primed to make an interesting run here and potentially give Houston, I don't want to say troubles in the Elite Eight game, but certainly I think closer than
one hell of a game if that's indeed the matchup that unfolds for the right to go to NRG Stadium, because it'll be a home game for Houston if they get there, and would obviously be a home game for Texas with all of the Texas faithful driving distance away. Special thanks to Ron Slay, who was gracious enough with his time to break down all things SEC, help share some of the Kool-Aid there. Payne, it's amazing. You do all of this prep work, you get yourself locked and loaded for the round of 64. You do it all again for the round of 16, and by the time that we get back on the year next week, there'll be 2 meaningful college basketball games remaining before we crown a national champion on the ensuing Monday.
Yeah, only 2 games to break down next week, and just kind of scheduling. I know you have it on your calendar, but instead of Wednesday, we'll do Thursday for our final 4 breakdowns, because you have some nice lead time there. So back next Thursday, hopefully with a Texas -4 ticket. That
little Texas two-step this weekend. The only way Bet the Board would have it. Houston on the money line from rolling over from last week. And, of course, the Texas Longhorns -4 to punch their ticket to the Elite Eight. Best of luck with all of your college basketball investments, wherever they take you this coming weekend in the round of 16, deep into the Elite Eight. For Payne Insider, I'm Todd Furman with a Texas Longhorns ticket and Houston ticket in hand. Hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.